That being said, I would love for you to just evoke whatever comes up when you feel and think into decentralization and just go on an epic rant, because that's kind of what you're good at.
Story time with Marc Angelo. I'm gonna sit for this one. Save my legs for the party tonight. Who here is gonna party tonight? You better be, because if you guys are all laying on the ground and you're not gonna go boogie later, nuh-uh, that's not cool. Decentralization. Buzzword. Oftentimes full of shit. But important. Important because it's a step in the right direction as to where this world is going. You know, we're in transition between a massive centralized system that has enabled us, whether that be the banking system, the education system, the healthcare systems of the modern day world, into more and more of this radical free expression where we are being delivered more and more choice. There is more and more kind of forces looking to rampantly shift the reality that we are facing. And blockchain and cryptocurrencies are one form of decentralization. But the truth is that social media and even festivals are another. I mean, this entire festival, realistically, is a decentralized force of people coming together with a bunch of different agreements, all mishmashing into this one physical space. Right? I interface with a couple of people, I come together, we build a camp, we make agreements, boom, this part of the festival exists. And the camp right behind us does the same thing, and so on and so forth. So there's a centralized authority that is taking care of the organization, is kind of setting the parameters in the container of this space. But beyond that, everything within this festival is kind of freeform. There's a ton of things flowing, both on the good side and the bad side, that make this event happen. Now, as much as decentralization can be incredibly empowering, and as a technology and as some of the different ecosystems, I believe it really, really, really can be, it also is a very big weakness within this transition. Because as we are decentralized, we are also not so unified. We are also in this mentality of fending for ourselves. We're all fighting and competing on the algorithms for people's attention, for our businesses, and for our ideas to be brought out into the world. So in some ways, we've never had it better. In some ways, we've literally never been able to reach people in an easier format than we can today. We've democratized a ton where, you know, TVs and other things used to be, or, you know, having a TV show used to be the thing you needed to do. Now you can have a YouTube channel. But the challenge is that we've also created, through this decentralization, some level of hyper kind of consumerism, where we all have to have our own podcast equipment. We all have to have our own laptops and cameras and all the different things. We all have to play this game to some degree to participate, which means that we all have to collect all the resources that it takes for us to participate in that decentralization. It means that we all have to start understanding how cryptocurrency and blockchain work if we want to participate in using it. Whereas right now, I didn't really have to figure that out. I just learned the basics of how to use a bank card, and that was enough. So there's a learning curve to decentralization. And as we go through this learning curve, as we move through the power of decentralizing, we are going to go through a rocky period where it's just going to get actually significantly tougher. Particularly when I believe it's going to get real tough in the next financial crisis. And it's a heavy bomb to drop a bunch of people laying on the ground just recovering before they go take acid and closey. But it's true. It's really true. I mean, the number of people who are, I don't know, in a vulnerable position, let's say. Coaches or healers, a bunch of people who don't necessarily have that much infrastructure and are relying heavily on some of these decentralized systems. As the algorithms get worse and worse and worse for you to be able to gain attention, and then stack that with a bunch of people running out of money or resource, you've got a recipe for disaster when it comes to some of the freelancers that we've got going on. And nothing is more prevalent in this space than the number of new jobs that are, you know, now found in, for example, in America in the Trump era. I mean, half the jobs are in the gig economy. The gig economy, for those of you who don't know, are jobs that are just basically like pickup jobs. So like being an Uber driver is a part of a gig economy, right? Running an Airbnb business is part of the gig economy. So there's tons of people participating in this, but there's an enormous amount of pushback against these organizations, right? Like over time, hotels have been able to push back against Airbnb, and they've been able to kind of reclaim some of that market share that Airbnb was kind of running away with. Now Airbnb is still growing and it's still around, but what happens when the economy kind of shakes up a little bit and those margins aren't there anymore, and people kind of took away their safety net? So decentralization is a beautiful thing if you're able to maintain stability. If you're able to maintain a certain amount of effort into understanding the systems that you are decentralizing into, then you will win. But if you're not taking the time to do that, if you're jumping into crypto and being like, blockchain, I'm going to buy Bitcoin and fucking Dogecoin and all the fucking coins, without understanding the fundamental principles behind them and without understanding anything behind it other than hype, you are fucked. No, seriously, you're just fucking yourself. You're stepping into a space that I wouldn't suggest anybody does. I wouldn't suggest anybody jumps out of a plane without knowing how to skydive. So the same fucking thing is true when it comes to maybe slightly less consequential in terms of life or death, but a real force. Decentralization can and is powerful, but it's so powerful that it has the opportunity of truly wiping some people out. Now, here's where it gets really powerful. See, we in the Western world, for the most part, actually benefit greatly from centralization. We don't think we do because it's very easy to be like, fuck the man, fuck the system. So fucking easy to say that. But then you break your arm and you're the first fucking person in line at the hospital. Let's be real, right? Fuck the man, but then you're the first person who stops and, puts gas in the car. The roads that you drive on, the systems that you use, the internet, like these are systems. So we have centralized systems in a very big way in North America, for example, or in Europe or in other places. But in the developing world, that is not the case. They have a real opportunity of actually leaping forward, well past us. Like, there's so many people that never had access to the internet, never had electricity, but then end up with a cell phone. So now all of a sudden they didn't go from carrier pigeon to then telephone to hardwired phone to then cell phone. They just went straight from no phone to cell phone. So that's going to benefit the places that are disconnected currently, that are starting to get into the grid and are creating a completely decentralized grid from scratch, which is helpful because then they build in the infrastructure that does create the fail-safe if it goes down. Right? If everyone has solar panels on their house, even if your solar system goes down in your neighborhood, it's okay because your neighbor right next door's solar system is probably all right. But in a centralized system, if the grid goes down, we're all fucked. Yet, in a centralized system, when the grid goes down, we're a bunch of people who all rise up because we all have the same problem at the same time. So the likelihood that that problem gets solved pretty quickly, because we have, a lot of people are going to complain, is also quick. So there is power in centralization. So where do we go? What's better? What actually enables freedom culture more? Are we more free based on centralization, or are we more free based on taking care of all our own shit? Is anarchy any better for us? Would it be easier? I mean, maybe it'd be freer. See, freedom culture is an interesting combination of words. See, freedom would be total decentralization. You got to do whatever the fuck you got to do to make your shit survive, right? It's the jungle, law of the jungle. Sounds pretty good, but we evolved out of the jungle. Everything that has naturally occurred happened for a reason. It happened. Everything is natural because it's existing in a weird way. So we got out of that. We created structure, and with that structure, we evolved. Not always for the better. We've definitely lost our way in many of the different categories of life. But we evolved because of culture. Not just because of structures, we evolved because culture and socio agreements between one another, political agreements between one another, engagement between one another allowed us to communicate, allowed us to build agreements, and those agreements have served us. Again, have we gone too far? Sure. We've over-centralized copyright laws. We've over-centralized protecting things that do not deserve any more protection at this point. We've over-centralized our government so that lobbyists now have an easy way of infecting the entire system of law so that giant corporations can find their way because they just need to centralize convincing, like, I don't know, 100 people to swing a vote, for example. So that centralization is problematic. And the question becomes for me, at what scale is centralization good, and at what scale does it break down? To me, as a country, the United States of America is way too big. To say that you're going to govern and make a law that's going to be relevant in New York City, but then also have that same law have to be relevant in Arkansas is discounting the idea that locally there are different political ideas and ideals that are there, that are in conjunction with one another. Now, of course, there's state law and those things that matter, but I don't understand why we are trying to go so big. Why did we centralize more and more and more and more? And the reason it happened is because people were power fucking hungry, right? It's like we wanted to get more land. We wanted to increase the amount of space that we had access to as an empire, the people who built the empire. Now, the other thing is that too small a community is also weak. That's why they get taken out. I mean, just look at how America was founded. A bunch of smaller tribes are kind of decentralized, living in the forests of, I don't know, Canada or America or whatever it is. And in the weirdest of ways, they get taken out by a much bigger empire, much bigger centralized force. So centralization creates unification of power. Unification of power seeks to gain more power, therefore takes out decentralized power. So there's this epic battle between good, quote unquote, and evil, or between centralization and decentralization. And I won't say which one is good and which one is evil, because I don't fucking know. I don't really know what it's like to live in a decentralized system because I grew up in a centralized one. And probably most of you did too, right? So we have these ideals that somehow there's a better way. And I believe there is. I'm not saying there isn't. But I don't know what they are. And I'm willing to test that. I'm willing to test the theories of what this looks like. So even this mastermind that we're running here, and this camp here in Envision, and what we went to in Punta Mona, which is an eco-village on the east coast of the country here in Costa Rica, is an experiment in building a 150-person community. Now, who here has heard of Dunbar's number? Dunbar's number? Yep, great. A couple of you. Great. So Dunbar's number is a number of people that you can maintain trust with. It was basically a study that was done around particularly tribes, right? Like kind of indigenous tribes all over the globe and other, companies and different things. They really studied all these different groups. And they said, how many people can we actually trust, maintain trust with, so we stay in full connection community? Now, I'm not talking about like 100% trust that I would trust everything with everyone with everything. But I'm talking about enough trust that I give you at least a certain level of the benefit of the doubt. And so Dunbar's number says that at about 150 people, our bonds start to break. That, let's say at 200 people big, there's maybe like 50 people in the community that I'm not fully resonating with anymore. Or it's not that I don't resonate with them, it's just that I'm not sure that I could trust them, so I start hiding away. I start needing centralized power to protect me. Hence the invention of banks. I need you to keep my money safe because I don't know when the cowboys are going to come in and just come and rob me. So we're going to put it all together. We're going to centralize it in the big safe. We're going to centralize all our food so a warring tribe over there isn't going to come raid our giant pantry. So centralization was part of something that was important, and groups naturally form because they are more powerful. And they're more powerful because we all have different unique gifts and talents. And it takes a village to build a village, in the same way that it takes a village to raise a child, right? We need the plumbers and the electricians and the politicians and the insert name here, insert job title here to make an entire village function. But how big do they have to get? Because if we keep centralizing them, if we keep unionizing, we keep making things bigger and bigger and bigger, are we really is it getting more and more effective, or are we creating more and more cracks in the system? And so the balance between all of that, the governance systems of what maybe our world could need or use, probably lies somewhere in the middle of all of this. Maybe it's concentric circles of 150 people groups. Maybe it's small towns that need to relate with one another and having governance in that way. But where do you draw the line? Right? Like, where's the line of New York? If New York was its own governance system, where do you draw the line? We've been having this fucking discussion forever. That line in the sand, that line between a country and a border, has been a problem forever. And it's still a problem, and it's going to become more and more and more of a problem as climate change becomes a massive issue. You know, we think about the war in Syria, but many of us don't realize that it was a climate change problem, right? The war in Syria happened because they had a massive drought in Syria that led to a bunch of farmers not having food and jobs and money. So, of course, they start doing whatever it takes. They start radicalizing, because what other option do they have for taking care of their family? It's not that there were radical people that wanted to overthrow the government. It's what they were doing is just trying to fucking survive. Because that's what we do as humans. We look to survive. We look to thrive. But we can't thrive if we're in survival mode. We can't thrive if we are in fight or flight mode. So we need to figure out a way to shift that. And as the borders of Syria start disintegrating and the government of Syria starts disintegrating and millions of refugees start finding their way all over the world, that is going to be a continuous problem. Like, seriously. And I know that this seems like so far away. It's like, oh, yeah, that's happening in Syria, but that's okay. I don't live in the Maldives, so it's okay. My house won't be underwater. What about fucking Florida? Like, there's more people in California, the state of California, than there is in all of motherfucking Canada. What happens if a couple of earthquakes go off or a massive tsunami hits fucking LA, the flattest fucking area right there, and a fuck ton of water starts pouring into the city? Like, there's so much shit that could go wrong. So, being flexibility. How do we measure whether our system can take a certain amount of bend or break before it breaks, How do we start recognizing that decentralization can build the glue that we need for flexibility amongst a bunch of different elements? Now, where centralization and decentralization work really, really well is with technology. Right? Here's what I'll say. Amazon, centralization. But centralized system, ecosystem that empowers decentralization. Because never before have we been more entitled than to get shit shipped to our door in 2 days. And on day 3, we're fucking complaining. Right? But it's not all coming from Amazon. It's coming from all around the globe. There are millions of sellers all around the globe with products from all kinds of different companies, all selling through this one organization. So this organization has created a centralized system, a game, a set of rules for the game, of monopoly, let's say, that we all get to play by. Now, over time, it corrupts itself. People make fake reviews. They start buying sponsored posts. And then over time, it becomes just the next system and it erodes. But that's okay, because then the next technology comes up. Right? Amazon was fucking nothing 20 years ago. Nobody had an iPhone like 11, 12 years ago. They were just made. They were just invented. So it's really, really, really interesting because we forget how far we have come. We are forgetting how quickly decentralized technologies are actually spreading across the ether. They're spreading across the universe. They're spreading across our system and then becoming the norm. We normalize so much quicker now than ever before. Culture is shifting at a pace that is incredibly fast. The algorithms of Facebook 2 or 3 years ago means that your business could have been completely different. The results you would have had on Facebook 2 or 3 years ago are completely different than we have to do today. I know because I reach millions of people online and I run a marketing agency, 2 of them actually. right? One that focuses on making centralized systems, making websites and things for people, organizations, decentralized in a way because there's many clients and many people. But one that also focuses on decentralization, which is taking content, and rather than taking this content and putting it all in one place, like the content that's being filmed right now, we're going to take this content from Freedom Culture, which is a collective flag, a decentralized flag, kind of like a rainbow-colored flag or an anonymous mask. We're going to take this content, and instead of putting it all on one platform, we're going to spread it across multiple different platforms. So, for example, I have made friendships with pages like Futurism or Goldcast or Collective Evolution or 150 plus pages online. They're all grassroots pages. But by having built a decentralized network of all these pages, I can guarantee a certain amount of reach. I can guarantee a certain amount of people paying attention to a single system. So by taking advantage of a decentralized system, understanding how it works, and fighting against a centralized system of the algorithms of what Facebook and Instagram are now kind of pushing upon us as organic reach dwindles from, 2% at the top to maybe 1% organically. So if you have 100,000 followers, maybe you get 1,000 people to see a post. We see this shift start to take place. We see something take up. Sure. So, with that said, I don't know that I have an answer. But what I do know is that centralization and decentralization is something that we can think about. And I invite you to think about where you are in your stance on centralization and decentralization. How are you hedging your bets against the forces of the ocean that are going on around us? Can you see the trends? Can you pay attention to what is going to continue to happen? Because it's very simple. Like, the algorithms of Facebook and Instagram are going to get worse. So if you're investing heavily there now, that's cool. But that's not where the trend is going to be, right? Like, I'll start investing in Pinterest and LinkedIn. Why? Because the attention there is going to be easier. It's simpler. There's more decentralized power to go around because that central authority at the middle of it isn't as complex or powerful yet. So finding the decentralized systems that are springing up, riding the wave in the same way that you would ride a surf, right? Not creating the movement, but just riding the existing waves that are there. You get to enjoy that ride, recognize when it's kind of dwindling, when the surf is, breaking, and then get back out in the ocean and ride the next wave. I think that we are entering the sport of kind of like surfing. That's where our system is at today. And I could talk about this forever, but I know we have the next speaker who's going to come up. There is a ton for us to unpack on some of these different pieces. And I invite you to think about the trends. What are the trends in your industry? What are the trends in your life? Not where they're at just today, but how are you hedging your bets for tomorrow? And I'll say one last thing, which is when it comes to permaculture, permaculture is kind of building like an ecosystem that naturally functions. You can think about always planting the tomato plant, which is something you have to work at year after year after year after year all the time, one after the other after the other. Or you could start planting seeds today that are fruit trees too. Because the amount of effort that it takes to plant a seed that is a fruit tree today is the same amount of effort it takes to plant a seed that is a tomato seed. And if you can balance between those elements just a little bit, you'll be more empowered. Because obviously a fruit tree will take 9, 10 years before it bears its fruit, but once it does, you'll forever be empowered. And those who have really, really thought about that, those are the trendsetters. Those are the authorities that are decentralized that become centralized. Thanks.